Hi guys, welcome back to another Smeester's Corner. Today we're going to be talking about how to have more power in your life, how to have more control in your life, and there's a word for that. We call that agency. And this affects everything. So we're going to be talking about what that is, how to have more of it, and what kind of beliefs we want to embrace and which ones we want to stay away from to have more agency. All right, so I have a question for you. Which statement best describes you? One or two? One is, I feel like the hero in my own story. Or number two, I feel like the supporting character in somebody else's story. Now, maybe you've never thought about that before. If you haven't thought about that before, that's something to think about. But if you had to take a stance, and maybe it's a spectrum, maybe it's not one or the other, but which one would better describe you? If it's the second one, you might have an agency deficiency. And so that's what we're going to be talking about, because we want to feel like the heroes in the story of our own life. All right, so I have a stat for you. It says here, 39% of American adults under the age of 25 think that they have the power to live a meaningful life. Only almost 40%, so less than half of Americans think they have the power to live a meaningful life. Here's another one. Today, kids are less, just American kids in general, are less likely to take risks, and by less likely, I mean a lot less likely, to take risks, less likely to explore unfamiliar ideas, to tolerate those who think differently, and don't want to stand out. I'm going to argue that both of those come from a lack of agency. I believe, as a teacher, that we don't teach kids how to have more agency. We teach them about all the things that can affect them, but we don't teach them how to affect themselves. So what is agency? Agency, the definition is, you have the ability to positively affect the world around you and yourself. And a lot of people just don't feel like they have that ability. Okay, so that would be low agency. The higher your agency, and there have been all sorts of studies about this, it'll increase your mental health. It'll increase the amount of success that you have in your life. It'll increase your resilience. It will affect everything about your life. All right, so let's get into this. First of all, you have to know that behavior follows belief. Belief comes first. Behavior follows your belief. So what is it that you believe? Because your behavior will follow that belief. And when it comes to agency, we can break the belief down into two kind of beliefs. And it may not be necessarily an either or, maybe it's a spectrum, but we call these locus of control, okay, in psychology. And one is an external locus of control and one is an internal locus of control. Okay, so see where you fit. The belief in an external locus of control is you believe that external things in your life have more power in your life than you do. So that would be things like systems. So maybe it's like you believe capitalism or socialism have more impact on your life than you do. Or you believe that other people's actions toward you affects your beliefs, your emotions day to day. You're just reacting to what life throws at you. Or it could be a belief in institutions, things like racism, institutional racism, or the patriarchy, or things like that. And we're not here to debate whether or not you think those things exist or how powerful they are in your life. What we're here to talk about is, even if you think that those things exist or not, how can you have control in your life despite those things? If you think that those forces have a greater control in your life than you do, you would have an external locus of control. Versus the other locus of control is an internal locus of control. That is where you think that you are largely responsible for the outcome of your life. So an external locus of control, if you fall somewhere on the spectrum of that, maybe where you think you have some control, but all these other things have more control over your life and you're just reacting to life, what life throws at you, that would be a low agency mindset. That's what it's called. So you're more likely to be passive, because why be active if you're not in control? So you're more likely to be passive. You're more likely to be reactive, where you're just reacting to things. You're not taking proactive steps in your life. You're just reacting to things. And you're more fatalistic, like the fates have more control over your life, like that you don't. So like maybe in healthcare, maybe you're told some health diagnosis and you think to yourself, well, that's just the way it goes. Can't do anything about that. People with a low agency mindset more believe that life happens to them. Like they're not doing life, life is happening to them. That is in contrast to people with a high agency mindset. People with a high agency mindset are more likely to be active because they believe that they have control. They're more likely to go do things to have success. They are more likely to, that's in contrast to being passive. They're more likely to be active. And they're more likely to be optimistic about things because they believe that they have control and that they can do something about that. People with a high agency mindset are more likely to believe life is something that you do, not that happens to you, but something that you go out and do because they're active. So the reason that we're having this conversation is because there have been tons and tons of studies on agency, on a high agency mindset versus a low agency mindset. And people with a high agency mindset, all the studies show they have less depression. Their academic achievement goes up because they're not making excuses for themselves. Their mental health increases. Their life satisfaction increases. And they handle change better. They're more adaptable. They're more resilient. And that's why this is important. It's not to shame anybody for what your beliefs are, but we can always change to be better. And that's what we should be striving to do, is change to be better. So now let me give you a couple of real-life examples in history of people who, by all accounts, we would probably say their agency was taken away from them, but that's not how they saw it. So the first one is Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela lived in apartheid, and because he wanted more agency for him and the people around him, he was put in jail for 27 years. 27 years. So you would think that someone was thrown in jail for that for 27 years might think to themselves, oh, woe is me. I can't do anything about this. This is just my fate. I'm in a cell. There's nothing I can do. Nelson Mandela, while he was in prison, read a poem called Invictus. That's the title of the biofilm of Nelson Mandela, Invictus. And the last lines of the poem go, and he read this poem every day while he was in prison for 27 years. And it's a high agency poem. I actually have this poem framed in my basement. The last lines of the poem go, quote, "It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." He read that for 27 years. And then when he got out, he became the president of South Africa. He had agency. Another historical figure, Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He was alive during Stalin's Russia, communist Russia. He was a true believer, a communist. He sent a letter to someone kind of criticizing Stalin. They read that letter because they'd read all the mail. And he was sent to a gulag, which is basically a concentration camp for political prisoners, for 8 years. And most people died in the gulag. They would basically just work you to death. While he was in the gulag, instead of saying, woe is me, how could these people have done this to me, I'm a victim, he went through his life with a fine-tooth comb and thought about all the things he'd ever done that led up to this point and how he could have changed that. And he resolved that when he got out, he would change things about his life. And he did. And when he got out, he wrote the book Gulag Archipelago, which is a great book. It's brutal and describes what it was like in the actual gulags, because the Russian people didn't know. They just assumed if you got arrested, you must have done something. And they published that underground. And that's one of the most powerful books written in the 20th century that helped take down the Soviet Union. That was Alexander Solzhenitsyn, just a guy who had high agency in his life. And the last one I'm going to tell you about is a guy named Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust, was imprisoned in a Nazi concentration camp, survived that, and then became one of the world's leading psychologists. And here's a quote from Viktor Frankl, because you would think if there's anybody on this planet that's still alive or just recently deceased within the last few decades, it would have been an Auschwitz survivor or a Holocaust survivor, because all agency was taken away from those people. But this is his quote. "Man does not simply exist, but always decides what his existence will be, what he will become the next moment. By the same token, every human being has the freedom to change at any instance. And that's what he believed, and that's what helped get him through the concentration camp, is his belief in his own agency. All right, so now let's talk about beliefs and how you can have more agency. So first of all, you need to examine, what are your beliefs? Do you tend towards a higher internal locus of control or a higher external locus of control? What we call those limiting beliefs. Do you have limiting beliefs that hold you back? There's an analogy that I like to give, which is when you're catching crabs, do you know the best way to catch crabs, to keep the crabs in the bucket and from crawling out and escaping, which is what they're going to try to do? The trick is you catch other crabs, because those crabs, the crab that's at the top that's trying to get out of the bucket, the other crabs below will pinch onto that crab and pull that crab down. So to get crabs to stay in the bucket, you get other crabs. So the analogy is, what crabs do you have in your bucket? Are you that crab to other people? Is your inner voice that crab to you that's pulling you back and holding you down and saying you can't do this and I'm not in charge of this? Like if you're a student, for example, which I hear all the time, saying, I didn't do well in that class. Why? Well, it's the teacher didn't like me. That's a limiting belief. Maybe the teacher didn't like you. I don't know. Or maybe that's just your belief and your excuse about why you don't need to try in that class. Other beliefs you form. And in psychology, there's a term called catching feelings. And it's not like the dating catching feelings, about dating someone and having feelings for them. In psychology, this is catching feelings describes how a person, when you're hanging out with other people, you tend to adapt to their beliefs and to their behaviors. So catching feelings is catching the feelings that they have. So who are the crabs you're hanging out with? Are they pulling you down? Are you catching their feelings? Are you catching their beliefs? Are those limiting beliefs? Here's another thought that if you can really grasp, it can really help your life out and let go of the things that you can't control. This comes from the Stoics. Okay, so Marcus Aurelius, one of the greatest Stoics, wrote Meditations. The person that he learned from had this quote, and he tried to live by this. It says, "It isn't things that upset us or make us feel certain ways, but our judgments about those things." So one student I had last year said, well, yeah, but if someone calls you fat, you can't control how you react to that. It's like, well, are you reacting to the thing that they said? Or is it your judgment about what they said that makes you feel bad? You can control your judgments about those things. And it's easier said than done, but you can work towards not having such a harsh judgment. And maybe those judgments are coming from you. Maybe that judgment influences your judgment. Another way to increase your agency is to be a curious person rather than an uncertain person. Okay, uncertainty, when you're uncertain, instead of going, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? I don't know, and going down the what if rabbit hole, that triggers the defense response in your brain. So you go around in defend mode a lot when you're uncertain. It's better to just be curious. Just say, oh, what's that? Let's try that. See what that person says, instead of just being in defend mode all the time, which is what I see a lot of students and a lot of people these days are just uncertain. So they're just in defend mode all the time. And I think that's what's contributing to the culture of being offended all the time. People are just in defend mode because they're uncertain. Curiosity can transform uncertainty from a threat to excitement, because now you're excited about trying to find the root of this thing that you're exploring. And that puts you in explore mode versus defend mode. And you're more likely to go out and do things because you're curious. You're more likely to go out and take action, okay, and do life instead of just watching life happen to you. You're also less likely in explore mode to be anxious and depressed. Okay, those feelings just won't come as much. And the last thing is you need to let go of bitterness and resentment. If you have bitterness and resentment inside of you, all psychologists and therapists will tell you that it's almost impossible to help someone who's holding on to bitterness and resentment until they decide to let that go or decide that they want to try to let it go. And they can help you through that, but you have to want to try to let it go. Until you do that, you can't be helped. You're just going to be spinning your wheels. And your anxiety is going to be a lot higher. Your depression is going to be a lot higher. Your agency is going to be very low. You're more likely to experience more negative feelings in a given day. So if you have bitterness or resentment, and maybe it's totally justified, maybe something really bad happened to you, but until you decide to let that go, your agency will probably be lower. So I hope this helps. Thanks for watching.